Hello, gorgeous people. She's not in yet. Not in yet. You know the rules. I got Kim here today. Shout out to Kim. Mike will be sent the chat after the call, but quirky questions only, please. Nothing grown up or that we can find in a quick Google search. But you have a fascinating background. And am I right that do you only do nonfiction? I
Pretty
heard
much.
something a while ago. Somebody was like desperate to get you for like a fiction mail book, and they were like, "Nope, I've heard he only does nonfiction." Was that like a concrete decision, or just something you've ended up just kind of doing?
A little bit of both, I think. I always enjoyed the nonfiction narration because I come from a background where I've done a lot of documentary narration and stuff like that. So when I came to audiobooks, I really thought that it might be nice to carry on with what I knew and see what was transferable in terms of nonfiction narration. And I always joke, people say, "Why do you narrate nonfiction?" I say, "Well, the stories are better." Because real life is far stranger than fiction a lot of the
Yeah.
time. Um, and when I decided I wanted to do nonfiction, I wanted to see how much of what I'd already got from documentary narration and long form narration, long form, it's nothing compared to audiobooks, but
I know
the
what you
long
do.
narrations that I'd done, I wanted to see how much of it was transferable. So I worked with Sean Pratt, and Sean said, and I always remember this because it fits me like a glove too. He always says, when I was a kid, if you'd given me a book about mummies or a book about how somebody made the pyramids, I'd much rather read the book about how the pyramids were made than the one about people chasing mummies around the pyramids. And I kind of feel a little bit like that, really. I like becoming, you get to be kind of a subject matter expert on these sometimes really marginal bits of history. And you get to become this little subject matter expert for the time that you're narrating them. And then, of course, a lot of it just evaporates again afterwards. But I find the nonfiction stuff fascinating. I'm also not a characters guy. That's the other thing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, because if you ever do decide to turn to that, you've got some voice for the male protagonist lead. I mean,
Yeah, but I don't come from
you
an
could wipe
action
the
background.
market up with that.
I
I'm just
don't
saying,
come
if
from
you
an
want
action
extra
background.
pocket money on top of your career, you can.
What I've said is, I've said at this point, I've said it's not exclusively nonfiction, but I don't relish the idea. Like, I'm sure you're one of those people, possibly, who likes getting a book and there's 30 characters in it, and like, ooh, I get to play them all. I'm exactly the opposite. That's anathema to me. But I'd be open to the idea of doing things like a multicast or something like that,
Yeah,
where you get one character and make it your own. I'm not really into the let's do lots of characters stuff. So,
yeah.
although I have done a couple of, I think I've done 3 or 4 fiction titles, and they've been well received. It's just not where my passion is.
Because I've listened to your samples, and you've like seriously the male protect. Well, because see, I'm a thrillers fan, so I think it's more fantasy and sci-fi. You get like all those characters. So thrillers, you just give me one good killer, and I'm happy.
They're making a point. They're making a point. But at this point, I also thought about, well, how do you stand out? I mean, I'm a Brit in America, but there are a few of us, you know. But I thought maybe being the Brit in America who really only does nonfiction might at least make me memorable, even if it restricts my choice of work, perhaps.
Well, also, you're the Brit. You've done some genius marketing and branding there. You're the Brit in America that lives in like this like fairy tale existence that we've like, oh my God, we've seen the pictures. And like, so you know how they say on social media that everyone makes it look like they're living the high life and their dream has come true, but it's not really true. But like, it really is true with you, isn't it? Like, we really do have a good reason to be jealous. Like, how did
Um,
you make this happen? How did this? Okay, wait, I need to start earlier. 10-year-old Mike.
okay.
Tell me about him.
10-year-old Mike. So this would be 1982. And 10-year-old Mike was, well, actually 5-year-old Mike was always fascinated by the voices that he heard on the TV and the radio. And 5, 6, 7-year-old Mike was also a compulsive button pusher. So anything that had buttons or knobs or things to twiddle, that always fascinated me. So
Oh,
from a
you
very
were that kid.
I was the I was the kid who knew that he wanted to be on the radio, or wanted to be the voice that he heard on the TV, although had no idea what that looked like or how that might happen. And nobody in my family came from an entertainment background or a broadcasting background. So yeah, and I was an only child. So I think I spent a lot of time on my own playing with my gadgets, pretending to play radio stations and things like that. Um, and I think around 1982, I was really getting into the music scene and getting into all the 80s music. So that night,
When music was good.
uh, yeah. So I was at home. Also by the time I was 10, I think I was beginning to realize that because of my sexuality, I wasn't quite like most of the kids I was hanging around with. And so I think I withdrew into myself a little bit around that time. It's not like I had an unhappy childhood or anything like that. I always felt myself to be pretty happy as a kid, as a teenager. It's just that I wasn't into going out playing sports, playing games, and doing all the other stuff so much. So
You were self-contained.
I was, and I was plotting, I was scheming, trying to work out how I was going to get myself into a career in radio at that point.
So you already had big dreams, even that young.
Yeah, I think so. And my
That's
parents were fairly supportive, to be honest. I mean, I think were more concerned than I was about how it might not work out, because they didn't have any. It's not like they had any hints for me on how I was going to do what I wanted to do. I had to work all that out for myself. But they encouraged me. They always had the fallback of, you've got to do well in school in case it doesn't work out the way you think it's going to. But when the point came, I think I was just about to turn 17, and I'd gone from GCSEs, O levels, which is like where in the UK your compulsory schooling finishes at 16, and then you can opt to stay on to do A levels until 18, and then you go to university or whatever. And I'd opted to stay on and do A levels. I'd made spectacularly poor choices because I'd thought that my route into radio was going to be probably through the engineering side, because there wasn't a way in on the performing side so easily. So I'd opted to do maths and physics because I thought I was probably going to go on and do like engineering or something stupid. And very, very quickly, it was brought home to me that maths and physics at A level weren't anything like what I was used to at GCSE level. The only thing I was really enjoying was French, which was a language I'd opted to carry on with. But of the three, it was the only one that I was really making any progress with. So at this point, I'd spent maybe a year and a half trotting myself around radio stations in the West Midlands, and I'd landed at BBC Radio WM down at Pebble Mill, and it became clear that all of the button pushing that I'd liked to do when I was a kid was going to come in useful, and they offered me a job doing the technical stuff for the breakfast show. So at
Wait,
17,
how old were you? How
17,
old?
I just turned 17 the week I got taken on by the BBC.
That takes quite a lot of guts for a 17-year-old to have so that takes some serious confidence. Did you not have any?
No, I didn't have that confidence. I'd been helping out with the Saturday afternoon sports program. And so the producer of the sports show knew that I'd got what it took to be able to do the panel and work the desk and do all of that. But then another producer basically said, you need to go and talk to Andy Wright, who's the program organizer. And I was terrified. And she marched me down the corridor and said, Mike needs a job.
But you did it. That's really, Kim says in the US in the 70s, DJs had to have an engineer degree to be on the air.
Right. Well, I worked with, in my early days in radio, I worked with what we would call personality presenters. So people who came in who couldn't do all of the technical stuff and needed somebody like me to drive the mixer. So I would sit in the control room, putting all the carts in and playing records and doing all that stuff, and they would just do the presentation, the hosting stuff. So that was how I got my start. And then I got tired of that and decided that I wanted to be hosting myself, and I took myself off to another radio station, and it all went from there.
How old were you when you did that?
18. No, still 17. It was less than a year.
Seriously?
Less than a year.
You never got distracted. You never hung out at too many kegers or lost your identity or hung out with the bad sort. You seem very...
That all came later.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, seriously. So you're at this other radio station.
Yeah, so I went off to BBC Radio Shropshire, so to a little rural radio station in Shrewsbury, and I was there for about 2.5 years. And then I said something on the air that I shouldn't have said, and that all came to an abrupt end. So I've got one of those stories as well.
Well,
And
like a
then
bad, wait, a bad word or what?
not a bad
Can you tell
word.
us
It was just
more?
like I said something. Okay, so it's going to sound terribly trivial at this point, but it lost me my job. But I referred to something that was in an internal memo that wasn't really suitable for being on the air. And it just kind of all unraveled from there. So I went off and worked in a call center for 6 or 8 months, which was enough to convince me that I never wanted to have another call center or office type job ever again.
So
Um,
while you were doing this in your head, what was the story? Oh my God, my life is ruined. I'm never going to get out of this. Or was it, right, this is a lesson. I'm moving on after this?
a little bit of both, I think, because I guess I was 20. It really felt like like this career that had started early and that I'd got a great gain on had suddenly come to an end. So I went off, licked my wounds for a while. I was in the process of coming out as gay at the time as well. So I went off and had this weird year where I was working in a call center during the day, and then I would I would work in my local gay bar in the evening. So that was a baptism of fire. And then a few.
That's actually really smart though. That was a smart move, isn't it? Because if you're coming out and being who you are for the first time, I would think that environment would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Close
yeah.
friends.
It was amazing. It was a really it was a tumultuous time, as you can imagine. But then one of those lovely coincidences happened. One of my friends said, "Oh, you know so and so," and I did know so and so. And he said, "Oh, they went for an audition to be a continuity announcer at Central Television, and they didn't get in." And we're like, "Oh well, ho hum." And then I thought about it. And I thought, "Well, I could do that." So I had no idea what was involved in being a continuity announcer. And a continuity announcer, for anybody who's outside the UK, what we mean by that is they're the people who record or voice the links between the television programs. It's something that we have quite a big culture of in the UK that doesn't really exist in America or a lot of other countries. And it comes from the days when people were in vision, there'd be the friendly person in the armchair who'd introduce the next show or whatever. And that culture has carried on in the UK. So I became a TV announcer. And that kind of got my voiceover or my broadcasting career started again. And I did that for a while. Then I still wanted to press the button, so I went the other side of the glass and I did TV transmission for
Wow.
ITV. And then I still wanted to push more buttons and tell people what to do, I guess. So I went off and directed TV news for about 6 or 8 years. And I did that for ITV and the BBC, and then I did it with Sky News for about 3 or 4 years.
I'm a big fan of British TV. It's mostly the reason. Well, I mean, I did marry a Glaswegian, but I moved here pretty much for the TV. For the TV. I mean, I'm sorry, one foot in the grave. I've fools and horses. I moved here because I was like, I have to live with these
Those
people.
Americans.
They're extraordinarily funny. There's nobody does humor like the Brits, and nobody. There's,
Whether it always travels, though. I mean, some Americans really get it and really get into it, which sounds
yeah.
like you. And for a lot of people, I think it just goes completely over their head because it can be it can be quite an insular kind of humor that relies very heavily on knowing British culture.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's I think what I loved about it so much. You felt like you were getting an eye into this like other world because it was so heavily laden with the culture. And I mean, you still put Victor Meldrew on, and I am laughing so hard I'm wetting my pants. Basically, it's never gets old to me, and I think that's what I love about it. Is it's made me fall in love with this country. So. But saying that, ironically, now that I'm over here, I watch more American shows
how
when
long
I
have
was
you been?
over there. We lived all over. We lived here. We lived in the Jersey, in the Channel Islands for a while, and then back. Because you see, when you're in a relationship with someone, but you're not quite ready to get married, but they're from another country, you tend to only stay in one country for 3 months, and then your visa runs out. So I spent
Well,
quite a few years traveling back and forth.
Well, we did it the other way around. I met my partner, Mark, in America, in Florida at the start of 2010. And we dated long distance for a few months. And then I managed to convince him, and the universe kind of cleared all the blocks for him to come to England for 4 months for the summer. And then at the end of that, we realized what you just said, that if we didn't do something, he was going to have to go back to America and we were going to be back to square one.
How did you
So,
decide which country to end up with in?
well, the decision was really made for us because Mark came up with the brainwave of, okay, so we'd only known each other a few months. So for us to have done what at the time would have been a civil partnership in the UK would have involved a lot of red tape. And to grant him a visa to come into the UK for a civil partnership when we'd only known each other a few months wasn't ever going to happen. So he came up with this little brainwave of, well, what would happen if we went to Massachusetts, which was his home state, and got married in Massachusetts? Would the UK government recognize that? And it turned out that they would. And when you went onto the Home Office website, there was a list of all the jurisdictions, basically all the states in the US who had recognized same-sex partnerships, even though the federal government didn't yet recognize it. And that meant that Mark could stay in the UK here. We got married in Massachusetts. We'd known each other 8.5 months. We got married to give it a try, to give us more time, and said, we'll be sensible if it doesn't work out. And then he came to live in London and got the equivalent of a green card. And we basically camped out in London. And we said, if it ever changes, if the law in America ever changes, we should go back and do this the other way, because you never know when something like that might change again. So in 2013, we learned that things had changed. And in 2014, we ended up moving here. And now I'm an
Wow.
American citizen and he's a Brit. So yeah, we both have dual citizenship.
Big,
Mark
big,
was coming back into the UK from America, and his visa had expired. And he didn't realize that he still needed a visa because he got the other thing, and it was his birthday. And they basically carted him off into a holding cell for.
and they're not as nice in America. I mean, in London, they're still kind of do the polite thing, even though they've got
They
a
were
gun.
really nice to him, and in the end, he managed to kind of play the emotional card, I think, and they let him off with a warning and said, "We're going to extend your visa for 60 days. Go and get it sorted out because we won't do it again." So that was a
But
lesson.
that's how you know it's meant to be. When against all odds, you still end up together.
Well, we have so many examples of things like that happening for us. And honestly, to circle back to what your original question was, which was how did we end up here? It's one of those really. We came to America in 2014, and we've built this life that looks nothing like, well, certainly nothing like anything I ever expected.
It's
Um,
the most
I,
beautiful thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Oh my God, it's like out of a picture postcard.
the thing is, what people might not realize is most people who move to America, move from a city like London and come to carry on their careers or whatever, will move to another city. So,
Yeah.
they'll come here, they'll end up in New York or Chicago or LA, San Francisco or something. I came straight out of the middle of London and straight into rural America in the South. It's a bit of a change from London, but what it did mean was that we ended up with a lot of space. So we went from a 950 square foot terraced row house in London. If I say ex-council house, you'll know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, so it was an ex-local authority, social housing, basically, that had been sold off. The people we bought it from had been in it for 40 odd years since it was built. And we moved from 950 square feet with like a 15-foot garden in the front and whatever to 19 acres on the side of a mountain in North Carolina, most of which is at 45 degrees and it's dense forest. But if you told me 10 years ago that I'd be living in a log cabin and keeping goats and chickens and then later bringing in horses and kind of turning it into a horse ranch, I would have thought you were nuts, because I didn't see any of that in my future. I thought we were going to move here and at least move and live in town, or at least live in the suburbs.
Now,
Uh,
how long have you been in the place that you're in now?
we moved in here in March 2015. So when we're recording this, that's what, about eight and a half, 8.25 years. Yeah.
Do you feel physically different and emotionally, like on soul level? I'm getting a bit woohoo here, but for breathing, for the lifestyle, the breathing, the air's got to be fresher if you're near a forest. I remember we used to go camping and you could literally breathe actual air. I mean, and
Yeah,
that
I mean,
life, do you feel like on a granular level that it's improved your health?
absolutely. And one of the things I realized before we left the UK was that I wanted to spend more time in nature. So we've created a life that is lived entirely in nature. The forest starts 30 feet from my bedroom window, and there's that, it's there. Our air quality today is pretty poor because we've got all of this smoke from the Canadian wildfires that's pushing down over a lot of the country. But normally the air is very clean. I came back from APAC here at the end of March and got out of the car and immediately could tell the difference in the air quality between where I'd been in New York City and coming back home again. And I just took a deep breath and thought, oh, it's good to be home.
Yeah, I get a bit worried about that here. And because I went through a spate where I was like just a workaholic, didn't leave. And today I went and took a walk. And for some reason, I must be going crazy. I almost hugged a tree. I was like just putting my hand up against a tree, hoping nobody like saw me. Just like I had to like ground myself. I had to like touch something outside. I think we don't realize how much that affects us.
It absolutely does. I love it. I mean, it's an adjustment though. I mean, when I moved here, it was so quiet at night. And I said to Mark, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to sleep. It's too
You know,
quiet.
that would freak me out. Does it not scare you having it too quiet?
Not anymore. Not anymore. I absolutely love it. It's not for everyone. And one of the things about living in rural America is you get a very different experience than you get if you're living in urban America. So where I live, without wanting to get too much into politics, I can see Confederate flags from my kitchen window in the winter when there are no leaves on the trees. But it's interesting because our neighbors, it's very much a thing of, well, you keep out of our business and we'll keep out of your business.
Yeah, I can
That's what
respect that.
and one of our neighbors here is probably the best neighbor either of us can ever remember having anywhere we've ever lived. So we've created our own little community here, and as a gay couple living in the rural the rural backwaters of North Carolina, I think we're carving our niche, and people seem to let us get on with it.
So that, well, in retrospect, now I've got a good picture of where you live and the quietness at night. You might not want to narrate thrillers. But okay, so tell me about like a normal, I'm fascinated by this. Like, can you walk us through a normal day? Like a
Yeah,
routine, like wake up such and such time, cup of coffee kind of thing.
yeah. I'm not as good in the mornings as I used to be. Although I think I've gotten better at it again recently. I'm in my fourth month of not drinking at this point, which is a whole other story. But I tend to wake up. I tend to wake up early, but then kind of lie around in bed or whatever. About 7:30, my alarm will go off. Um, as long as I'm not rushing off anywhere, I try to meditate, do 20 minutes of mindfulness meditation. Get out, make a drink, pet the dogs, all that kind of stuff. And usually I try to do my narration in the morning. I find that I'm sharper, I have better focus. My mouth works better in the morning, whereas by about 1 o'clock, I find I'm tripping myself over.
Yeah.
And by about 12:30, oh, I didn't know this word until recently, but it's a great word. Bulbarigmus. Do you know that one?
No, what is that?
Sound of all the stomach noises. So by about 12:30, 1 o'clock, because I practice intermittent fasting and I don't usually start to eat until mid-afternoon.
What do
By
you
about
do? Do you like 16:8 or something?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much. I have my first thing around 3 o'clock usually, which is usually my afternoon mocha and usually a little a pastry or something with it
How
because I
long
like my
ago did you start intermittent
intermittent
fasting?
fasting. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago.
Did you notice any change?
Yeah, I noticed that I stopped being hungry every 4 hours, which was
Yeah.
interesting. So for the first 2 or 3 days, it's tough because your body's still sending the signals that you need to eat now. And then it all settles down and it becomes surprisingly easy. So I find that my energy level through the morning is much more constant. Whereas if I used to have breakfast, I would get, my stomach would start to rumble mid-morning, and I'd start to. If I had lunch, I would usually find that I had a slump around 3 or 4 o'clock. As it processed or whatever. So I find not eating until early afternoon is usually best for me. I'm not religious about it. If I'm going somewhere or if I'm hungry, I'll eat. But usually, it makes for a nice clean morning because I don't have to worry about making breakfast or lunch or anything else, and I just get into my narration. I aim at this point for about an hour of finished audio a day, although I'm seriously considering upping that. Because what I've found, I think, like a lot of people, is since COVID, the voiceover side of my business, which was always the main part of the business, has kind of it's come down in terms of the number of projects and the amount of work. Producers I speak to tell me exactly the same story. It's not just me. But what's nice is that the audiobooks have been pretty constant for me. So I'm at the point now where I'm thinking, well, maybe I can let go of a little of the voiceover stuff and let it find me when it finds me. But maybe what I should be doing is upping my audiobook output so that I can keep my income
Yeah.
level like it to be. So that's the next challenge, is finding more publishers who publish nonfiction who need a Brit. So that's the next job, I think. I can't
Have
remember how we.
you reached out to Scribe?
I am not sure, but I will put them on my list.
Reach out to Scribe. Jeff would love you. And
I
also
will.
because you're over there, so it makes it easy for them recording wise. Reach out to Scribe.
Yeah. I've got a lot of places that I can reach out to. It seems to be it's a little Venn diagram though, finding the ones that do enough non-fiction and also have enough British authors that they want a Brit to narrate it. I'm very fortunate that when I started doing audiobooks, a couple of friends who were already narrating introduced me to a couple of places that they were already working with, and one of them was Tantor. And of course, Tantor is, it's
Yeah.
the pound gorilla, and they are never, fortunately, short of things for a British narrator. So I have a really nice relationship with them, and they tend to keep me pretty busy, and I love them for it. On the other hand, as a freelance, I've been caught in the past having too many of my eggs in one basket
It's
because it only.
scary. Yeah, it is because they're so easy to work with, and you know you're going to get work, and it's like so much easier just to send a quick "Hi, I've got a free moment. Anything you want to
Yeah.
throw at me?" rather than the other. Hi, my name is Daniela. This is everything I've done my entire life. I'm being
Please hire me.
casual, but professional. It's so
Yeah.
much easier, but you can't have it all in one basket because
You
I've
can't.
always, when and I find somebody else said this on a call recently. They said, you find that like you'll be hired by one publisher for a while, and then that'll taper off, and you'll find that another publisher has kind of moved in. And it seems to go that way in your career, but like I think we always as freelancers having to keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm very conscious that, they're a nice bunch of people, and there's a group of people casting, and they're casting for different imprints and things, which I think helps it. But it only takes a change of policy, or somebody that hands you most of your work to move on or take maternity leave or something like that. And suddenly you can find that you don't have anything, and it takes time then to rebuild that. So although I want to carry on doing lots of work for Tantor, it would behoove me, I think, to have more irons in the fire so that
Yeah.
publishers who've potentially got fewer titles do need a Brit. They're in my rotation at least.
Yeah.
So balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. But you're very lucky because you have, I mean, because your voice, seriously, I've listened to your samples. You're very lucky. I'm sure it's talent as well. I know hard work. It's hard when you tell somebody, oh, you're very lucky. It's not that, but that beyond hard work and experience, some people you just listen to and they just have the je ne sais quoi, and you've got the je ne sais quoi, obviously.
Well, that's very kind of you, Daniela. Thank you. I mean, none of us gets to choose our voice, obviously. I mean, you can do things with it. I've rolled off the rough edges of my West Midlands Black Country accent, and but I was turned down by the BBC in 1994 when I first went to the World Service because I had too much of a regional accent.
But it's
Uh,
beyond voice. I think it's acting ability with you. I think what I hear with you, because I'm not, I mean, I've been here so long, I can barely tell the American and English accents apart anymore. I mean, I live with a Glaswegian, so who knows who anyone is, but you've got your acting ability comes through. You're an actor. You're easy with the script. You're comfortable. And
It's interesting because I struggle to see myself as an actor because I don't, I looked at your resume, and you've got Meisner and all the other stuff. And I was like, none of that is me. But I have always had it seems I've always had a facility for reading aloud. And it came from when I was a very young kid. I mean, I was a disruptive influence in what the Americans would call kindergarten. But by the age of about 6, my class teacher had realized that I had a really good reading age. So my parents came in for parent teacher evening, and it was all doom and gloom, and they left thoroughly pissed off with the whole thing. And as they were leaving, my teacher, Mrs. Roberts, called out. She said, "Oh, there is one thing, Mrs. Cooper. We think Michael has a reading age of 14." And
wow.
she'd by this point cottoned on, and she was sitting me down in front of the class in the afternoons to read them the afternoon story because she could go and have a cigarette and a nap. But I think that was what got me started and got me over probably the fear of reading aloud or reading to groups of people. And I think it went from there. And then it got hammered home in the years that I was at the BBC with the World Service as a newsreader, because that's a very specific skill set. You're reading to
Yeah.
time start. So you have a 5-minute news bulletin, which is actually 4 minutes and 58 seconds. And then at 2 minutes and 58 seconds, you have to make sure you stop for 2 seconds so that stations can opt out to do their own thing or whatever. And then you carry on reading for another 1 minute and 58 seconds. But of course, you've got your scripts. So you have to know how long each script is going to take you, where your out points are if you can't read at all, which things can be in brackets, and you're
Yeah.
basically spewing this stuff out, reading, watching the clock, watching the seconds tick by, and trying to make it all fit. On top of which, you'll be in the middle of that carefully crafted piece of news. And then the door will open and somebody will slide a piece of paper at you, which has got a change or whatever, and you're supposed to read that and then still get yourself back on time with the timings.
But that tie to the timing, I've got to say, because I think some people are born with innate talent. I think a lot of narrators, I see so many narrators, just beautiful, beautiful performances. And they'll confess like it's a dirty little secret. Like it's like, because maybe unless you're really, really young, the world didn't tell you could be actors. So you had to not only be an actor, but be very, very brave and able to find a way to like pursue all the quote unquote degrees or whatever you wanted anyway, when you were young. But they're still actors. I don't care what, and what you've said, it reminds me of me cold reading, because my superpower, and I can't brag about it because then it gives the impression that you're not marking up enough. And of course I can mark up, but I can take the most difficult nonfiction book or fiction ever and completely cold read it, and you wouldn't have a clue. And it's what you're talking about, the timing. I don't know if I could do that. That sounds really hard. But
that's a practice thing.
Yeah, but your mind, you're the somersaults with the words, the connections, the ability to navigate like an athlete. And narrators do that, but they don't give themselves credit. They're like, I don't have that degree from such and such school. And I can't tell anyone I'm a super cold reader, because they're like, yeah, but guess what? One day you're going to read the whole book and find out someone's German. And I don't cold read. Yes, of course I'm a grown up. I do my work.
Well, the thing is, one of the reasons I prefer nonfiction is for that reason. You called me on it, if you like, because I have exactly the same experience as you. I count myself as a world-class cold reader. I can, you put a piece of news in front of me or whatever, I'll read articles to Mark, flawlessly for a minute and a half with all the inflections in the right place. And I get that that's a skill. I have no idea where that comes from. Practice is some of it, but I think it's one of those things
You're
that
born with it. You have to be born with it.
So I don't do a lot of prep on my nonfiction books. I work out how long the chapters are going to take to record. Things usually come in a little short because I tend to read a little faster than most people. So I end up doing myself out of my PFH rate a little, but But I'm pleased you said that, because you sometimes feel like an imposter. Although I have met at least 2 or 3 fiction narrators who tell me that they never read the book first. And I say, why?
You,
What happens when you get to chapter 12 and you realize that
yeah,
the
I would be worried about, I need to know like the bare minimum.
Well, one of them said, and I'm obviously not going to name names because we're in the cone of silence, because I realize it is the cardinal sin. But one of the people I spoke to said, I don't read ahead because I find it's hard then not to foreshadow what's coming up later in the book if I already know the outcome. For me, it works better if I don't know where the book's going and I'm surprised along with the reader.
But you see, the way I do it, I find out the characters' names. I do a skim for all the characters' names. And then I do a word search for all the characters' names, look up their details. I look for problematic words. I don't necessarily want to know the plot with certain books, like the complete, because then you're going to sound, but depending on the book, I respect the book for what it is, and depending on the book, but I'm not going to apologize because for like nonfiction in particular, because I'm having a conversation with someone and it's more natural and I'm having a conversation. And seriously, some of these nonfiction books, 15 hours long, if I read that whole thing and then read it again to you, I don't care how great an actress I am, you're going to hear the boredom and the, you know.
One of the things that that Sean Pratt said to me when I was coaching with him that made a big difference for me with the nonfiction was he said, even though it's nonfiction, it still has to be a performance.
Yeah.
That was the light bulb moment for me. It was like permission to do something more than just read the words.
Yeah, I'm having a
So until
chat.
that
I'm
point,
having a conversation with you.
yeah, because until that point, I'd heard nonfiction narration, and what I'd heard, I now realize probably wasn't that great, because what I'd heard was fairly flat and fairly monotone, and I thought, well, this must be how nonfiction narration is. So I'm very conscious when I narrate to bring as much of myself and my personality as is appropriate for the text with it.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to be sitting there listening to me for 8 or 9 hours talking about something, details about World War II or whatever, then it needs to be entertaining.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Because we've all powered through. Um, we've all powered through. I recently did a book that was nonfiction, and you know how they're denser. Sometimes they're denser. Um, each page, I normally do, it takes me 2 hours to record an hour, and I never stop. I'm not interested in stopping. I had to stop every 4 pages. I could only do, and I had to take a 7-minute break because
wow.
it was it started off as like a 12-hour book and ended up being like a 15-hour book. I had to stop. I just couldn't do it. So I think we do ourselves a disservice with saying everyone does 9,000 such and such words. Everyone does such and such hours or two. Everyone what? What book?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I mean,
different.
I use the 9,600 words an hour as a thing when I break the book down to work out where I'm going with it. But every book is different. I mean,
Yeah, I'm 87. I'm really slow compared to you.
I'm usually
So
more like 10, sometimes even 10-2.
really,
Yeah. And I think about it and I think, well, am I going too fast? And then I listen back to it and no, that's a comfortable pace. And actually, a lot of people speed up their audiobooks anyway. Maybe I'm just talking more at a rate where they want to listen. I don't know.
well, Johnny Heller says it doesn't matter, and so does PJ. It's you're acting and you're honest with what you're doing. That's what matters.
As long as it sounds right, it's right?
Yeah, yeah.
But some of the densest books, the Oxford University Press, the very short introductions books, you see them sometimes in a big display in bookstores or
I
whatever.
think so. Yeah.
There's like 800 of those, if you can believe it. And
Wow.
I've narrated at this point about 14 or 15 of them. And they're usually only like 140 pages. And they look very innocuous and very easy. They're some of the densest text I've ever come across. The one I'm doing now is a very short history of the Victorians. And what's really surprising to me about it is it's the slowest book in terms of my narration that I've done so far. I'm coming in and I'm way under in terms of words per hour compared to where I normally am. So you can never predict it. Like
Yeah.
you, I allow, if I've got an hour to record, I allow 2 hours, and it's usually a bit less.
And
Sometimes,
sometimes you're
sometimes there's
surprised.
a
And
lot.
also, do you ever feel like it's a tongue twister? Sometimes it's like, I'm not afraid of like larger vocabularies. That's fine. I find it interesting
Me
to
too.
still do a cold read. But sometimes it's literally like a tongue twister, like a
Sometimes, yeah.
15-hour tongue
One of the
twister.
things I do, and I don't do it as much now as I used to or probably should do, is when I get a book and I'm about to say yes, I'll pull up maybe 3 pages at random and start reading aloud, just to get an idea of how the author forms their sentences. What's their sentence cadence? Some of the ones in this book I'm doing at the moment go on for half a page, and there are no commas. It's like, where did the commas go? And you get an idea from reading a little aloud as to whether or not you and this author are going to get on. And sometimes it just flows, and you just like, oh, it's just like
Yeah.
pouring water. Other times, it's like their word order is just subtly different to yours. And I've got one of those brains that mostly proofs as it goes, so I tend to know if I've got it wrong. So I tend to get corrections packs that have, maybe a dozen corrections or stuff like that, because um, my brain tends to spot when I've done it wrong.
And the superpower, me too, except sometimes I correct things that might not be actual mistakes, but probably shouldn't be the way they wrote it, but I'll correct
Yeah.
it. And then I end up with a
Do you
ton of
also
it.
notice sometimes? Do you also notice sometimes that editing, like the original proofing and editing of the text, gets worse towards the end of the book?
Yeah.
Quite a lot of the time, I find that the last quarter or the last third of a book, typos, there's missing words, there's verb agreements that don't, and yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
It's nice to know that the people on the publishing side are going through the same stuff that we're going through with it.
Oh, they are. I couldn't even imagine how hard that must be. Um, yeah, I just have so much because I mean, Tantor, I can say Tantor because most people have worked for Tantor or will work for Tantor. My own personal um, experience with them has been that the editors are the nicest human beings. I'm not saying it's okay for me to say this because I've already got jobs with them, so I'm not like trying to get a gig. They're the nicest human beings on earth. Like, and they must have some serious patience with like the questions we ask and the things we come back with and the book differences, but still that level of professionalism. And I think we find it in most places in the industry. The level of professionalism is bar none because
Yeah.
most people are freelancers or even the ones that work with the publishers. They take such pride in what they do. They want a good product.
Yeah.
I've worked many
Very
places that
different.
weren't like that.
I love my audiobook work. I came to it during COVID, because, as I said, things pretty much slowed down. Um, but for a long time, like a lot of voiceover people, people had said, "Do you ever fancy trying audiobooks?" And like most people, I would say, no, no, why would you? The monies are awful, the hours are awful.
You've been here for ages.
Only 3 years. I'm mid 60s on my titles, so it's not like I'm banging through them, but it's steady, which is nice.
That's a respectable number. See, I think we count ourselves as newcomers way after we are.
I mean,
Mid 60s.
I just did my first. I guess it wasn't my first. It was my first full-length solo title for one of the big publishers. I just got my first title for PRH,
Oh,
which again, felt
congratulations.
like a nice little milestone. Thank you. Because you know what it's like. You put these little markers or roadblocks in the way, and you're like, "Well, I won't be a proper narrator until such an. I won't be a proper narrator until I work with a publisher. I won't be a proper narrator until I work with a big five publisher, or So it's nice to see that there's movement forward with it, and I do really enjoy it. I would say at this point that if I could sustain myself just on the audiobook stuff and the voiceover stuff just went poof and disappeared, I would say I'd probably had a good run. But it's probably not going to go anywhere. It's probably going to carry on declining slowly, and I'm looking at other things that might be good for the future that aren't anything to do with the voiceover or the audiobook industry. Yeah, I'm actually training at the moment to do equine therapy, equine massage.
Oh, that's
Equine.
so cool. I love it with the horses. I love that. That's okay. So that brings me a good segue here. I've got a quirky question from Kim. She never lets us down here. Living in a rural place, have you, excuse me, guys, sorry for the cough. Have you ever been surprised by wildlife? Bear, moose, wolf?
We do get the occasional bear, but because we live at the bottom of a mountain and not halfway up it, it's a long way down for not a lot at the bottom of it. So our neighbors sometimes see bears. We don't see a lot of bears where we are, and we get black bears here, so they're not going to come after you and tear you apart so much. But there are interesting things that pop up sometimes that, for me, a Brit, I just think are cool. Like whenever we get the first fireflies, that's always a big thing for me because I don't have fireflies in England.
Love to see a
To me,
firefly.
that's a magical part of the American summer. But we get things like I find like North Carolina has lots of salamanders, so I found a red salamander in the yard the other day.
Would you
I
take a picture of fireflies for me and post it so I can see
do
them?
my best. Yeah, I mean, this year has not been great for them, unfortunately, but we'll get a yard full of them, which is really special. The other day I found a tortoise. That's nice.
Oh, did you keep
Yeah.
him?
I put him somewhere safe, but I didn't put him in a box. But yeah, there's interesting wildlife around. The bugs are a lot more than they are in England, though. That's something that bothers me.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
the summer it's a double-edged sword for me because I love that it's warm and it's nice outside and you can get out and do things. But the bugs do love me. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I actually had because we moved into this new house and the bugs like us during the summer here. I had a spider crawl into my ear, evidently, when I was asleep. And I was like wondering what I thought I was deaf for like 2, 3 months. And then finally you go and you're like, hello, in my job, I kind of need to keep my hearing. I had a spider in my ear. Is that not the grossest thing on the face of the earth? See, I always thought live and let live. They're lovely. Let them have them. Now I'm like, out of my house.
Yeah, 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 it's all a little gross. I spent the afternoon of the 4th of July syringing my ears and was amazed at what came out. So that's a
Ooh.
story. But yeah,
Yeah,
life
see,
on the
I don't want to
farm.
know those things about myself. Things they
Life
don't
on the
tell
farm.
you.
I'm sure a lot of it, it's dust and all the stuff from working with the animals probably just ends up in there at some point as well. But yeah, I mean, you asked originally about how my day broke down, and so I'll do the narration, and then the afternoon tends to be admin, and I'll try and get a workout in there or whatever. But at this point, especially now that our focus is shifting a little bit into the equine stuff, I like to break around 5 o'clock. So wherever I am at 5 o'clock with voiceover and narration, I stop, step away from it, and I go and do things with horses for an hour or two.
Do you ride
So
the horses like every day?
learning to ride. I don't ride every day, or anything like every day, but my horse Melody, I'll work with her. It might be some groundwork, it might be some riding practice, or it might be doing some practice of the massage methodology that I'm learning, which is called the Masterson method, and it's fascinating. You can so horses when horses get stressed, and they get stressed a lot because they're prey animals, they're constantly in fight or flight, and they can hold a lot of that tension in their musculature, and sometimes it doesn't. They'll lock up and they don't release for years.
Oh, my Budgie's a prey animal. Maybe I should massage him.
The Masterson method is they're about to bring out a book for doing it on dogs, but it uses Chinese acupressure meridians. And what they have found is that you can bring attention to different parts of the horse's body where it's holding tension. It will give you an involuntary kind of like a blink or whatever that shows you that there's tension there.
Wow.
And by very gentle massage, or not even touching it at all sometimes, but just keeping your hand near it, you can bring the horse's attention to it, and their system then starts to release, and you get these wonderful releases of tension, and the horses love it. And it's also it's beautiful because it becomes it's a two-way conversation between you and the horse. So you're looking for problems, and they're showing you where they are, and then you're helping them release them. So it's a beautiful way to interact with your horse and to improve the communication between the horse and the rider. But it's also something that's not voiceover and isn't likely to go to robots in 5 years' time.
But it's
So
also something to put in your, when you're reaching out to new publishers. Um, that's like a serious fun fact about me kind of thing, because how exciting if you get books on equine massage. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? That's the best. That's the. I've got two questions. And this is a good time for them. I'm going to start with your second one first. To Barbara, she's another one we can always count on for good questions.
hey Barbara.
Western or English style writing?
I usually ride in an English saddle, although we did go out to Colorado for a couple of weeks recently, where I rode in a Western saddle, which I also enjoyed. I like an English saddle, and the difference, in case you're not aware, is a Western saddle, you kind of have reins in one hand. English saddle, you're steering the horse with both. One's direct reining and one is indirect reining, but that's getting technical.
I saw your pictures, and you know what it reminded me of? You know that Billy, what's his name? You know the TV show where he goes out and they go out to like learn on the ranch. Billy, come on, guys, you know who I'm talking about. The actor with the black hair goes out with his friends to learn on the ranch. Somebody's
I don't know. I've
it's
not
like
seen that show.
it so reminded me of, he's a famous Billy, right on the tip of my tongue. I know, right on the tip of my tongue too. Um, this famous movies. They did like a series. I think there were like two or three of them, and they were really, really funny, hysterical. And it reminded me so much of that when you showed me the pictures. And the guy that worked there was like literally like, oh, that's really going to bug me now. Okay, so Barbara also wants to know, what's the scariest thing you've experienced?
Whatever.
Yeah, we
God.
don't hold back on this call.
Scariest thing I've experienced ever. God, what would that be? I don't know. There are so many things, aren't there? I did do a bungee jump at Victoria Falls in Africa. That
Oh,
was kind of
that's like
a heart in your mouth.
God.
Yeah, but it was great. I don't know whether I'd do it again at
What
51, but
was great about it? Can I just ask you?
the sensation of the free fall, I think.
Oh, that to me that just feels like it would be horrible.
What they don't tell you is, of course, when you go down, it's not like you just go down and stop. You come down, and then you go back up like 2/3 of the way you were up, and then you go down again. So you're bouncing up and down until you finally get to the point where you've settled enough that they pull you in.
I
I
would
did
hate
it.
the feeling of falling. Are you glad you did it? Do you think it
I'm very
made you
glad.
like, yeah,
Yeah,
conquered your fears kind of thing?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not one for a lot of extreme stuff. I have a friend who likes jumping out of planes, and I'm still on the fence about whether or not that's something I would ever want to do myself. Um, but yeah, I mean, I can't think of a lot that's really scared me, apart from the big serious things that we all get a little scared about, like pandemics and stuff like that. Um, but no, I don't think I'm terribly fearful. I'm quite pragmatic most of
No
the time.
ghosts. No in your no.
Always
Okay.
wanted to see a ghost and never seen one.
I know. I kind of would like to as well. I kind of would like to. We did have a weird thing where our cable box broke the other day. We're built on top of a Roman burial ground, and evidently, when they found out the city, they tried to like buy it and turn it into like a monument. And I guess the developers won, so they just like packed the cement back on and
So it's
built
like
us.
poltergeist in your house.
It's so poltergeist. And our cable box went on the other night, and the TV went on like at
Uh,
3 a.m. And there's no way either of us did it because we were asleep in the other room.
yeah,
So
that stuff.
I'm hoping we've got a haunted parking lot. Um, Billy Crystal,
Hilly Crystal.
Billy Crystal. It's like a famous show. It reminded me of that show. Well, he went off with a bunch of cowboys. There was like the old hardened cowboy with the hat.
You thinking about City Slickers, the movie?
Yes, that was
Yeah.
it. City Slickers, famous movies. Yeah, was that not like City Slickers, that vacation?
I guess it probably was from the outside for anybody looking in. It was amazing though. It was absolutely incredible.
It looked like it. It looked like it. I love the fact that you are evidence to me that some of the lovely, wonderful lives on social media are actually true. Because I know people want to think, oh, nobody really has. I love thinking people have wonderful lives because it gives me something to like dream about. You know what I
The thing
mean?
is, I decided a few years ago that with social media, I took a decision that I didn't want to add to the noise. I didn't want to be one of those people who was just posting for the sake of filling a content calendar or doing it because the algorithm says that you have to post X number of times a day in order to be in people's feeds. I just didn't want to be that guy, you know? So I'll post about my projects, but then especially with Instagram, which is a pictorial medium, I thought, well, I wonder if people would enjoy seeing pictures of where I live because I enjoy taking pictures of where I live and the animals and the scenery. I live somewhere beautiful. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's pretty special. And people do write to me all the time and tell me that they love seeing the stuff that I post because I do
They
worry
make me
about
happy.
the Belgian, you know,
It makes
because
me happy seeing it. It makes me think you could move to this gorgeous farm. It makes me happy. We did our start looking to like wills and all that grown up stuff that like you avoid like the plague your whole life. And I finally faced like all the financial stuff one day, and I was sitting down, didn't look at Facebook, social media, and I felt really content. I was quite proud of myself. I felt in control. I'm normally quite an anxious person, and I felt like really, really good. So the first time I kind of logged on to Facebook, and the first two things I saw somebody had someone, and I was happy for them. I am happy for them. So I always think, oh, I am happy for my friends. So this, why would it be negative for me? My friends don't post bad things. But then I was on some group and they were talking about, the strikes and the AI. And I'm not kidding you, Mike. Within about 10 minutes, I just felt doom. And I've had a nice, happy, contented day. 10 minutes of exposure. So I've decided from now on that I'm going to be a creator, not a consumer. I'm going to do what you do, post exciting, positive things I want to share, talk to my friends on Messenger, but I'm not going to scroll. Because when you're scrolling, what are you looking for?
yeah. And it's really easy to get taken to the energy of the dominant vibration in the room.
Yeah.
And if everybody's down and doom and gloom and just piling more and more on, it's really difficult to break out of that.
Yeah.
And it's not like you going in and saying, "Oh, come on, guys, it's not that bad," because you know what's going to come back. Uh,
Eaten a lot.
yeah. So I don't spend a lot of time. I don't. I probably still spend more time than I need to, but I've got quite good at this point. I've curated my feed to the point where the people who post the most doom and gloom don't appear in my feed, and I tend to see more puppies and
Yeah,
nice.
and me too. And then so I literally go on to the groups and search for the negative stuff. Like, why am I logging on to this?
Maybe don't do that. Yeah.
Okay, most important part of the call. Famous last words. If you could leave the studio audience in the next 60, 70, 80 years, or the YouTube audience, with one thing that you'd want them to take away from this call, words of wisdom, something to remember, what would you like to tell them?
Your deepest secrets only have the power over you that you allow them to have.
Ooh, I love that.
If there's something in your life that you're afraid to talk about, worried about what other people will think of you because of it or whatever, and I've had a couple of these in my life, it's empowering to move past it and take the power back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I could talk for another 2 hours about that, but
No,
that would
that's
don't let the things that the things that have the most power over you that are often things that you've created yourself, and the rest of the world doesn't care. And often, if you're prepared to share them, then the rest of the world will reward you for it by, you know, um,
because they've been scared themselves, and
Yeah,
they have things in common. Shame thrives in the shadows.
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's so reclaiming the power from things that you've allowed to have power over you can be very powerful.
Yeah. That's a perfect. I agree wholeheartedly with that one. Thank you so much for your time, Mike. This has been a piece of heaven.
Thank you. It flew by. I can't believe we've been talking for an hour.
It always does. See, it's the power of people chatting. You know what I mean? It's
I
the
hope we'll
best
get together again
medicine.
at some point, and I'll be over in the UK later in the year, so maybe I will see you at some point.
Yes, if I keep going out on walks, I might be actually leaving the flat again soon. Wonderful, wonderful talking to you, Mike. Talk to you later, and bye, bye. Mwah. Hi, Kim.
Thanks,
Bye.
Daniela.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.